Hello, my name is Jeff Steele. I'm the author of Best of Times, Worst of Times. At the outset, I'd have to say I'm quite amazed at how this astonishing story dropped into my lap. It's the story of Joe Shuttleworth. Firstly, he was a gunner in a Lancaster bomber over Nazi Germany in World War II. And secondly, it's the story of his pilot, Tom Blackham. The story began when Joe's daughter asked me if I could research the background to her father's story. Joe was still alive and he was able to give me it from his point of view, but he was also interested that I was able to put in the details of the strategy within which he worked, the world in which he lived during World War II. And he was also very keen to give me details of his love life, because this was a very complex time. A civilian had decided in Brisbane, Australia, to go halfway across the world to drop bombs on somebody else. So the interesting part of the story was, why would somebody actually want to do that? But it actually makes sense. When he gets to England, he meets the love of his life, and then his love life and his war life collide. That creates problems. But in getting to England, he'd actually had a wonderful time. He'd been across the Pacific and admittedly had to worry about Japanese submarines. He'd been by train across America. He really had the best of times by the time he got to England. He then did 6 operations over Germany, over Berlin, which was the hardest of all possible destinations for a bomber crew. And then he was severely injured and taken out of it. That's the first half of the story. The second part of the story, Joe and his daughter Dawn both wanted me to find out what had happened to the pilot. Whereas Joe's story was the best of times, Tom Blackham's story was the worst of times. After Joe had been injured, Tom went on to do 27 operations over Germany, and he was shot down on the 27th. He was picked up by the resistance in France. They thought he was a German plant and were going to hang him. Unfortunately, they didn't. He joined the resistance group, and he fought with them on several hair-raising escapades. And I was able to track down his account of what had happened during that time. He was then betrayed by a very nasty character to the Gestapo and was held by the Gestapo and in Frayne prison, which is where they held people who were thought to be helping the opposition. And then very, very suddenly they were taken away from Frayne and taken to Buchenwald concentration camp. That was hell on earth. I have got the complete story of what happened to him in Buchenwald and also his escape. And his escape from Buchenwald, I can only say, is the kind of stuff you can only put into a non-fiction book, because if you wrote it as fiction, no one would ever believe it. From Buchenwald, he was taken to Stalag Luft 3, which had also had an escape. And he was kept there for some time, and eventually they were taken from there, and he had to walk 900 kilometers from Poland to the north of Germany, where he was eventually liberated. The story is quite amazing. It's how one man could have a very, very good war until he was injured, and then one man would have an absolutely appalling war, and that's why the book is called Best of Times, Worst of Times. Thank you.